Amen. Just think for a moment, have you ever heard yourself or someone else utter the words, "I'm exhausted, I'm stressed, I am bone tired, I feel drained, I am on the edge of burnout, I am running on fumes"? I think it's safe to say we've probably all been there. I mean, we live in a very frantic pace world, hurrying and rushing around, working too hard, and all of our energies are depleted and our well-being is in tatters. And then we come to church. Welcome. Welcome to this church, this place for tired and wearied people. People who are looking for rest. These are the words we hear in Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Listen and follow along. "Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." This just seems so clear. Jesus is offering an invitation and a promise. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. This is the Jesus we like. This is the Jesus that doesn't demand anything from us. Here, Jesus is just all sweetness and light, rainbows and unicorns. And we love to hear these promises of rest and comfort, of light burdens and easy yokes. We love the self-help guru Jesus. But I hate to burst your bubble. I hate to burst the Children's Moments bubble. Jesus' words are a little more complex than we make them out to be. This beloved passage in the New Testament is less about a life of ease and more an invitation to discipleship. In this passage, Jesus was addressing the people of Israel who were burdened with the externalism and the legal do's and don'ts of the Pharisees. These were people who were weighed down with guilt and frustration and dissatisfaction that goes along with legalism. He was addressing people who were on a religious quest, seeking God and a relationship with God. But all they were encountering was a list of rules. You see, when Jesus was speaking to this gathered crowd, he wasn't talking to people with ordinary problems. These weren't people who were sitting around worrying that they had too many bills. They weren't worrying about their pensions. They weren't worrying because they had to deal with ungrateful children. He's calling to himself the religiously exhausted. Those who have tried all of the usual ways of finding some peace with the divine only to end up being frustrated. You see, when we typically read this passage, we tend to focus on what we want to hear. As a matter of fact, when we read the Bible, we tend to focus on that which we want to hear. "Come, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Who doesn't want to hear that? But by just focusing on that, we skip across what I think is the most important verse in this reading from Matthew, verse 29. "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." We have a wonderful... Can we go to a blank slide real quick? Not a black slide, just like the one with the picture. No words. There we go. Beautiful picture of a yoke. Or on your bulletin cover, a beautiful picture of a yoke. I mean, when we read this passage, we don't think of a wooden bar being strung across our back. We think of a leisurely nap with a wonderful Jesus pillow. But the yoke was a common symbol in Jesus' day for the law of Moses, especially the details of the law and the minute, ever-expanding demands of the legalistic Pharisees. Those who were under the Mosaic law were said to be yoked to Moses. Those who were under the authority of the Pharisees were said to be yoked to the Pharisees. And the yoke of the Pharisees demanded that you had to do certain things in exactly the right order to matter to God. In order to be a decent person, in order to be loved, in order to be considered significant. The yoke of the Pharisees demanded that you found God by keeping the rules, by doing what somebody else says is the right thing, and by living in constant fear of doing the wrong thing. This would be like saying to your child or a friend or your spouse or actually to anyone, I will only love you if you do what is right, and I will be the one who tells you what is right. I mean, to teach that God says this is not only terrible theology, it can also be devastating to people. And so Jesus was rejecting that yoke and offering his yoke. Instead, he offers us the opportunity to be yoked to him. He extends an invitation to all who want to experience the relief and joy of a grace-filled relationship. He extends an invitation to all people who are gathered, to the curious and to the convinced. His invitation is aimed to bring people to a deeper level of commitment, one in which they take on his yoke as committed disciples of Jesus Christ. And I love it when Jesus says, "Come to me." He doesn't say come to a new law, come to a new teaching, to a secret interpretation, or to a hidden loophole. He doesn't say come to a book or to a list, but come to me. Come to Jesus himself. In essence, Jesus is saying, if you seek God, if you seek his love, if you seek a life that makes some sense, if you want a way to understand this world that allows you to deal honestly with what happens without it destroying you, if you want to be who you were created to be, then come to me. Come to me if this is what you want. So I began this morning with a question. What did you want to be when you grew up? How many of you can raise your hands, actually became what you wanted to be? More than a handful, that's good. I wanted to be a spaceman cowboy. Not a lot of jobs out there for the spaceman cowboy. But if there were, I'd get it. I was reading a statistic recently that said 65% of school children today will eventually be employed in jobs that have yet to be created. So how can we ask kids, what do you want to be when you grow up, when they're preparing for careers that aren't even invented yet? What do you want to be when you grow up? It's a trick question. I think we need to stop worrying about what we want to be if we grow up and think about what do you want your life to look like? Because that's a question which we can address at any age. What do you want your life to look like? Throughout the New Testament, God reminds us that our lives should look like Jesus. This is who we were created to be. We were created to become like Jesus by doing what Jesus did. Caring for the hurting, listening to the lonely, feeding the hungry, praying for the brokenhearted, bandaging those who are wounded, loving the unlovable. This is what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. As a recap of something I said earlier this year, and I'm sure you all remember it, but that whole process of learning in the first century was every male child being trained in the Torah and in the law and in the tradition, but only the best of the best of the best. And if you were able to achieve that pinnacle of education, then you could go out and be yoked to a rabbi. And when you were yoked to a rabbi, you were learning what that rabbi did and what that rabbi taught so that you could be like that rabbi. That's what it means to become like Jesus. That's what it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, to be yoked to Him, to learn from Him so that we can be like Him. It means that we should pray as Jesus prayed. He prayed for His closest friends. He prayed for His mortal enemies. He prayed for Himself. We can learn so much from the prayers Jesus offered. To be like Jesus means that we serve as Jesus served. His entire life was dedicated in service to others. From the time He began His ministry until the time He died on the cross, every moment of His life was used in service to others. Now, we may not be able to dedicate our entire lives to service like Jesus did, but we can still do something, anything to bless the life of someone else. To become a disciple of Jesus Christ means loving as Jesus loved. I mean, His love was apparent as He thought of others more than He thought of Himself. He mourned with those who mourned. He comforted those who needed comfort. And He loved with a pure love. I mean, if you can do nothing else, show love. It will change who you are and it will make you better. And the most difficult part, I think, of becoming like Jesus is to forgive as Jesus forgave. For He provided us the perfect example of forgiveness, because not only did He forgive the sinners and those who He felt deserved it, He also forgave those who we would think did not. He forgave those who others considered outcast. He forgave even those who crucified Him. He looked beyond actions and He saw the divine in all humanity and saw the best in others and gave the best of Himself. Forgiveness is always a choice. And when we forgive others, that also means we can forgive ourselves. This morning, Jesus is extending an invitation to a relationship. A relationship with Him and a relationship with a community that has based its ministry on Him. Where we love God with our whole being, where we love our neighbor as ourselves. Jesus' yoke is directly related to that. And those who take this yoke upon them will soon discover that it is very much like a cross. So to come to Jesus is to discover that what can seem like a frantic and desperate task, this whole relationship with God, is in fact not something earned. It is a gift that is freely given. It's not about getting everything correct. It's about receiving the gift of God's grace and responding to it by sharing that grace with others. Jesus' yoke leads to life, and when we put it on, it means that we can be embraced by God's mercy so that we can show God's mercy. To carry it is to fulfill the will of God and our deepest humanity. We're called to this new yoke, not to a new law, not to a new set of rules, but to a person and a community built around that person. And in this religious quest, we will discover the greatest journey of human existence, the richest fulfillment and the deepest satisfaction. Jesus said, "Come to me, If you seek God, if you seek life, and I will give you rest for your souls. Let us pray.